Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us on our last webinar of the year. We'll be talking about how to mitigate against risk and remain compliant in your processing. We'll be hearing from Greg Brown, who's the Head of Supply Chain Governance and Performance at EDF Energy, who'll take us through their journey to their position as market leaders in this field. So today, as I said, you'll be hearing from Greg Brown, who's held various roles within EDF Energy over the last 14 years and has enjoyed positions as a senior business analyst and the head of procurement directorate before his current role as head of supply chain governance and performance. We'll also be hearing from Costas Xyloyiannis, who's the CEO of HICX Solutions, who'll be showing us how their solution can help to provide the environment that EDF are currently benefiting from. And I'm Ellen Leith, and as most of you know, I am the editor and director of PPN. So you do have the opportunity to ask questions as you go along. You just need to add these into the text box, which you'll find in the GoToWebinar panel, which is over on the right-hand side of your screen. If you type these in as you go through the webinar, I can ask Greg or Costas to address the questions at the end of this morning's webinar. So with that, I'd like to hand you over to Greg Brown of EDF Energy.
Thanks, Ellen, and good morning, everyone. So, yeah, as Ellen's kind of introduced, I'm Greg Brown, Head of Supply Chain Governance and Performance at EDF Energy. So what does that mean? So my responsibility really is for governance, oversight, systems and performance across EDF Energy's supply chain, which is really about linking in with the supply chain teams embedded within EDF Energy's business units to ensure the effective management of supplier risk and the overall compliance of our supply chain. So over the next kind of 20 minutes, my aim is to give you some insight in terms of our approach to supplier risk management and supplier compliance monitoring and share our journey towards best practice. And it is a journey. But first, I thought it would be useful to share some context about EDF Energy and our supply chain. So hopefully, if the slide is going to move, there we go. So EDF Energy, so we're the largest producer of low-carbon electricity in the UK, so we produce around a fifth of the nation's electricity. We do this through 8 nuclear, 2 coal and 1 gas-fired power station that our generation business operates across the UK, and with 31 wind farms that we operate through our renewables business. We supply about 5 million residential and business accounts with electricity and gas, and we've got a growing energy services business to meet the changing needs of energy consumers. We're also leading the nuclear renaissance in the UK. We've got 2 new nuclear reactors that are under construction at Hinkley Point C in Somerset in the southwest. And we're also developing joint proposals for new nuclear at Sizewell in Suffolk and Bradwell in Essex. And then finally, in terms of kind of group organisation, we're also part of EDF Group, one of the largest energy groups in the world. So really, the point of all of that was really just to indicate that we're a bit of a complex business. In fact, at times, it can feel a little bit more like we're 5 separate businesses with 5 different sets of compliance requirements, risk appetites, etc. And similar to most of probably your organisations as well, we're facing an increasingly complex compliance landscape with, it seems like, new regulations or initiatives being introduced every few months that we need to respond to. So from a supply chain perspective, we're supported by about 5,000 suppliers with a churn of about 10% each year. And in any kind of normal year, our spend would be in the region of £2 billion per annum. But clearly, with the the huge investment that's going on into Hinkley Point down in the southwest, we're probably going to reach up to £5 to £6 billion spend within any kind of given year over the next couple of years. But perhaps more simple than some of your organisations, perhaps, what we do have is we've got a single ERP. So we use SAP and have been on a journey over the last decade or so, migrating each of the different business areas onto a common platform, which gives us some advantages and improves the ease with which we can assimilate and analyse our data. But that said, it's not all plain sailing, as one of the The features of our business is we use a variety of asset management systems to manage the different plant systems, and some of the peculiarities of the integration have a bearing in terms of some of the ways that we need to configure our other IT assets. So one of those assets, finally, we've got a single supplier information management portal, HICX, which Costas is going to talk us through a little later. So we implemented HICX back in 2014 and use the supplier information management portal to support our supplier onboarding process across all of our business units and to enable continuous monitoring of the compliance of our supplier base. And I'll pick up a little bit more about that later. But first, I wanted to share our overall framework for managing supplier risk. So at the top, we've got our 6 better energy ambitions: zero harm to people, better for customers, etc., which set out EDF Energy's short, medium and long-term objectives for improving our social, economic and environmental performance. By meeting these, we expect to deliver on our better plan, that is to create better lives, a better experience and better energy, and to do so in a sustainable and responsible way. And then below these, as a business and from a supply chain perspective, we face and need to manage a variety of risks to deliver against these objectives. And the size and relative importance of these risks really changes depending upon the business unit being supplied or the nature of the activity being performed. As an example of that, the kind of profile of health and safety risk will change enormously when considering people working within our call centers for our customers' business versus contractors potentially working at height to maintain plant on some of our power stations. Similarly, the risk associated with a breach of payment card industry data security standards, so PCI DSS, is only really a risk to our customers' business and the underlying IT infrastructure through which we process credit card transactions. So we recognize as an organization that our approach and the extent to which we give consideration to some of the items identified within the grey box below the risks needs to be tailored to meet the needs and risk appetite of our individual business units. So how do we do that? So the boxes in blue at the bottom: effective governance, processes which consider and are proportionate to the risk and value of individual activities, suitably qualified and experienced people, and increasingly with integrated processes enabled through technology. And then the last point on this slide is just to reflect that we manage these risks throughout the supplier lifecycle, from initial registration on onboarding through to final closure of individual contracts. So that's our framework. So on this next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we implement that in practice. And given the nature and interest of this audience, probably spend most of the time talking through our approach to onboarding assurance and continuous monitoring at the bottom of the pyramid in the kind of the orange. But if I quickly start at the top, from a strategy perspective, as I've said, we need to work out which risks we're going to manage and how we direct our finite resources to manage them. At EDF Energy, and probably true of most of your organizations, we do this through a supplier relationship management framework through which we segment our suppliers to understand their importance to us from both a value and risk perspective. And this then goes on to inform our supplier relationship management approach. With our key strategic suppliers, this includes a program of C-suite engagement meetings supported by analysis of the relationship, future opportunities and risks, etc. But perhaps peculiar to our organization, our supplier segmentation approach is a little unique insofar as we've got a view of the supplier segmentation for EDF Energy overall, but also within our HICX portal, we maintain a segmentation that's specific to each of our business areas, which enables a bit of a hybrid approach to supplier relationship management. So each of the business areas can maintain their own framework in parallel to the company-wide approach. Similarly, each of our business areas is responsible for managing their own risk and the risk management processes, which all feed up into a company-level risk universe through which we maintain executive ownership of the company-wide risks and control strategies. So then in the kind of the next light blue segment of the pyramid, as I talked about on the previous slide, supplier risk management and compliance happens throughout the supplier life cycle. So it's an integral part of the way we manage our contracts and implement supplier relationship management. This includes ensuring that the sourcing approach is appropriate to the context. So in our generation business, we've got a number of plants that are approaching end of life, and this means that we'll contract for the remaining life of the plant in certain situations. We also use the data we collect through our HICX portal to understand the relationship between our suppliers. So we get a view of the groups of suppliers and kind of the hierarchies between those supplier organizations, so that our aggregate expenditure with these groups can be understood, and we can use that as an input to our overall SRM framework. We run a program of supply compliance reviews, which we implement with our key strategic suppliers to independently assess their compliance with our minimum standards. And again, we use the output of these to inform our supplier relationship management approach. And we're also using the supplier information management portal to communicate with our supply chain, both to encourage their support for delivering against our ambitions, and again to kind of periodically remind them of our expectations in terms of policy compliance, etc. And across all of these activities, we're maintaining proportionate oversight through the various governance forums that exist within our business. So then that kind of brings me to the lower orange box, which is the onboarding assurance and continuous monitoring. So this is really the engine of our approach, I think, and where we really utilize the HICX portal to drive our process. So within there we have, and Costas will touch on this a little bit later in a bit more detail, we have a series of category risk matrices that are defined per risk area. So for instance, we have human rights, environmental, anti-corruption risk areas within an overall framework of UN Global Compact compliance. And then the risk matrices are also tailored to the delivery environment. So really what that means is to the kind of the business unit in which the supplier will be being used. So we have our risk matrices. We've then got some risk modifiers that are incorporated within the questions that we ask of our suppliers. So things like the size of the organization might modify the risk that is predetermined through the category risk matrix. And then we've also got a series of APIs that link out from HICX into kind of products like Dun & Bradstreet to capture and provide us with information that's then used to inform the kind of the downstream view of risk. So our onboarding process is really that a number of calculations of risk are calculated, and then a series of supplier questionnaires workflowed out to the supplier for completion. Those questionnaires have questions within them that depend upon the risk that's been calculated and the subject area, and they will come back into EDF Energy as an organization for subject matter expert evaluation. So that might mean that the health and safety risks within our customers' business are workflowed to the health and safety team within customers, or the information security risks and questionnaires that are responded to by the supplier will be pushed through to our enterprise IT security team. So they have the ability to add their kind of technical insight across those different factors, and depending upon the kind of the response, can optionally follow up with the supplier through other questionnaires that we have configured within the system and integrated into the process. Once we've got all of those subject matter expert evaluations, we've then got a final compliance approval that's received and given by the relevant category manager within the supply chain organization. So through the portal, we're collecting insight from across our organization, collecting the responses from our suppliers, and ensuring that the appropriate people are reviewing that information to be able to make an informed decision as to whether or not EDF Energy or the individual business unit should be transacting with that supplier. And then downstream of our kind of initial onboarding process, we've got a series of document and initiative kind of expiration processes that enable us to maintain compliance as we move forward. So moving on to the next slide. So in terms of our kind of journey really, I suppose it started with kind of the acquisition of British Energy back in 2008, 2009, which really informed our overall supply chain approach. So British Energy had already organized itself into a best practice supply chain. They'd started their transformation back in 2004, and when EDF Energy acquired British Energy, we were then able to adopt a number of the leading practices already in place within that part of our organization across the wider group. As I mentioned on one of the first slides, we've gone through a process of kind of SAP implementations, and the final SAP implementation of the kind of the generation business, or what was British Energy, was completed roughly in 2012, and that was one of the kind of the key enablers to enable us to kind of leverage the value from a kind of a more harmonized approach. So that really enabled us to start the process of supplier master data cleansing, which we took forward into the implementation of our supplier information management portal, and really enabled kind of decent spend analytics for probably the first time across our business. Then in late 2013, we formed our overall supply chain organization. So this was adopting the kind of the operating model that was in place within British Energy, and this enabled us to kind of build the team more than anything of skilled resources and ensure accountability for supply chain transactions within the business units, with a kind of a central team responsible for proportionate governance and oversight from the centre, so kind of my area. And then in 2014, we implemented the HICX portal. So this really leveraged all of the supplier master data cleanse that we'd done already, but took us kind of to the next level, I think, in terms of harmonizing our data, understanding the kind of the differences between our processes and where those processes were different for the right reasons and perhaps different for the wrong reasons, and enabled us to implement flexible processes within a single technology that recognize the risks that we face as an organization, but enabled us to manage those risks at a local, but also at a company-wide level. So we use our HICX portal to go through initial onboarding and kind of pre-qualification of our suppliers against defined minimum standards. We're also using HICX to capture the supplier information that we feed through as master data into our SAP system, and then use the portal itself to maintain that master data, as well as maintaining the kind of the compliance information that sits around it. And as I've kind of mentioned, within that portal, we've got all of the kind of the automated workflows and kind of reminders in relation to evaluation and maintenance of kind of ongoing compliance. And as I say, Costas will be talking more about our implementation of HICX and the HICX portal more generally in a few minutes. So then in 2016, we implemented our overall supplier relationship management framework. So this was really leveraging the data that we'd managed to get from the implementation of HICX to ensure the kind of the appropriate prioritization and optimization of resource, to really focus that in terms of securing maximum value, both again for the kind of the individual business unit, but again for the kind of the company overall. And through the analysis that we were then able to do around supplier hierarchies and supplier groups, we were able to give much more accurate kind of transparency of kind of spend and relationship to the C-suite engagement meetings that we are now running to ensure strategic alignment with those most important suppliers. And then the final point on this slide is really just recognizing that it is a kind of a journey, and we're still going through that kind of continuous improvement. So, we've managed to achieve a certain level in terms of process harmonization, but also kind of process difference within an integrated solution. But the ongoing drive within EDF Energy is really towards more integrated processes and technology, reflecting the kind of the differences that we know that we have as an organization, but really to drive and unlock that value through commonality where commonality is kind of possible across our business, and doing that through ensuring that the management information that we're able to extract from our systems is as accurate as we're able to make it. So in summary then, a few of the lessons that certainly I've learned kind of along the way, in particular around the kind of the HICX implementation, which I'm sure is kind of why a number of you have kind of dialed in. I think the one of the key things is clearly to invest time on your master data. We went through quite a lot of pain, I would say, and I'm sure that Costas will probably touch on this a little bit more as well, just in terms of ensuring that transparency of our supplier base. So we spent a significant amount of time leading up to the HICX implementation, really looking at duplication where we had duplication within our master data, and trying to eradicate that to the extent that it's possible. But within that, I alluded to some of the complexities of our asset management systems. We do have some challenges in terms of the way that our kind of SAP to asset management systems configurations are done, which means that we have some constraints about the way that we structure our kind of master data, which really kind of bleeds into the kind of the second point, which is talking about managing complexity at source. So I think that's true to the extent that it's possible. We have some challenges in terms of some of the integrations that we have with our asset management systems. We also had some challenges in terms of the different processes that were in operation at that time within the different business units, and the kind of the overriding desire from almost all areas not to tweak too much the processes that they were already operating. So where you can, I think, manage complexity at source, but also recognize that you're never going to eliminate all complexity, and you're always going to take some of it forward with you into a new solution. And so the third point, ensure a clear link between requirements and business value. Certainly through our kind of implementation of HICX and through our kind of downstream use of HICX post the project, I think it would be fair to say that we over-engineered in some areas. Some of our requirements never actually materialized in terms of happening within our kind of processes. So yeah, I mean, the kind of the point there is just to guard against over-engineering for over-engineering's sake, and really focus on what matters and do that well, as opposed to trying to kind of achieve perfection within kind of a single implementation. So the fourth point there is make compliance easy. So one of the good things through our HICX implementation, we were able to design in and configure a number of different processes that ranged from kind of standard through to exceptional processes, which we still maintain within the portal. So what that means is that we're not circumventing use of HICX or our supplier information management portal from an onboarding perspective, because we have processes for exceptions that are designed and configured within the solution itself, which means that the kind of the go-to place for onboarding a supplier is naturally go to the HICX portal, as opposed to trying to kind of work around it, which means that we protect our master data and the kind of the management information that we derive from that master data. And again, just kind of final summary point, as I say, it is a journey. We're still on a journey. There's certainly a series of opportunities that we're working with HICX still to expand some of these new compliance kind of requirements that we face as an organization. Certainly opportunities to integrate further within HICX, and then some of the developments in terms of the HICX platform since we've implemented it are part of our kind of roadmap for 2019 and beyond in terms of leveraging the value of those. So I think that's probably a quick whistle-stop tour of the way that we manage risk and how we utilize kind of HICX from an EDF Energy perspective. So what I'll do now is hand across to Costas from HICX Solutions, who will talk a bit more about the product and then also touch on some of the points that I mentioned in terms of the complexity of our implementation. Costas.
Thank you, Greg. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to be giving a little bit of an overview of us, and then again going into some more generic but also a couple more details around the implementation which we did at EDF. Now bear in mind there are a lot of slides. Some of them are more for your reading later on. That's why they're included, so we may brisk through them a bit quickly. But in terms of who we are, HICX has been around for over 10 years now, since 2004. We work cross-industry with large global organizations, but also over time smaller ones as well. And it's not any particular sector. You'll see here energy, you'll see aerospace, you'll see defense, you'll see media, you'll see pharmaceutical, manufacturing, automotive, retail. So, every industry has its own challenges, but every industry uses suppliers, and of course, we're there to support them through their journey, as we did with EDF. In terms of our approach to providing such a solution, what we've realized, which I think Greg has touched on nicely, is that it's not one size fits all, especially when you're trying to centralize something which, invariably has many variables, many differences by business unit, by what you're spending. So once you move away from typical transactional processes like, procure to pay, you realize that it's very non-standardized when you go across industry. And the way we were able to be very successful here was take the idea of Lego blocks, and yes, there's many things out of the box, but customers are able to change things, to adapt things, to evolve things throughout that journey. And here we're talking about business-driven configuration. So not HICX, no IT skill set. It's something which customers can go in and adapt and change over time. Now, in terms of what are some of the challenges, and I refer to this as supplier data and information governance, because any kind of process you're going to do around risk and compliance, really, as Greg has touched on, and also our learnings as we matured as an organization, it all came back to your data and your information. And this is something which is true not just of our experience, but you'll notice that the Deloitte CPO survey, which was done the last 2 years, basically ranks quality of data, lack of data integration, and number 4, current technology as the key barriers to transformation, digital transformation around supplier management. So even though everyone's implemented ERPs and P2P systems, there is still a massive struggle in this area. This, again, from a recent survey done by procurement leaders, so looking at all different data points, again, the same kind of thing resonates. So poor data integration, disparate data sources. The challenge really boils down to data, especially in the era where we are now, where the idea of going digital, doing more with less, being more efficient and doing things at scale, if we want to do all of those things, we need to rely heavily on very good data and very well integrated data. And one of the big reasons everyone is so focused on data and digital is, of course, we've noticed that large, well-established organizations are slowly being disrupted. You can look at the Dow Jones. That used to be a lot of big conglomerates. Now it's all tech. So everyone is rushing and looking at digital as the next business frontier. And all these things which we're talking about here, it's really about digitizing and digitalizing, as EDF did with their risk management process The whole idea is, of course, managing throughout the whole supplier lifecycle management, and how can we go digital in this arena. And why is digital and data such a challenge for the supplier area? Well, I think it's very, very cross-functional, and there isn't a clear understanding in most organizations when they embark on this. All the different people that rely and need data and different types of data, different parts of the process, and it comes back to, you know, who owns the data. And actually, the answer to this is, it's of course around data governance, and it's not one single organization. It's actually going to be many organizations, and that's how you can be successful in this. It's about connecting stakeholders throughout the life cycle of managing suppliers and giving them the right data at the right time, but also enabling people, subject matter experts, to really take ownership of their data and do things at source. So going back again to some great points from Greg around managing complexity at source, do things when they happen, not later on when you've created suppliers in your ERP and other systems. Once you start using things, it becomes much more difficult to adapt, and of course it makes you far more inefficient, you know, in further downstream and upstream processes which rely on this data. Now, there is kind of a simple message in terms of how you go about this and where do you start. And again, it was the same story with EDF, but in order to create a strong control and to ensure risk and to ensure compliance, you need to think of one simple theme, which is one door to your organization. And you need to start with this simple premise. That's why how you onboard and do the pre-qual of suppliers is so important, because this will feed multiple other systems, you know, ERP, but also as we see mature organizations are moving to a more, you know, best of breed model where they have different types of solutions to manage different types of spend. So it's not uncommon that there's a different solution for catalog versus direct versus services versus travel. So, you know, it's kind of a myth to think one size fits all, but the way to go about this journey is start with where you create data, control the entry point, and make sure it cannot be circumvented. And of course, this means integration is very, very important. We've seen many people approach the idea of, you know, risk management by setting up kind of a siloed system. This will have a lot of issues later on because your data will not align. And of course, you don't really have any real control because data is entering the ERP and other transactional systems and things are happening and you may not have visibility of that. So if you want strong controls, and where do we start? One front door and very tightly integration to other systems. So how do we go about doing this? In an implementation, for us, we always say technology is the third most important thing. So we're going to start with the idea of governance, who owns what, who does what. And this, of course, is going to feed into processes because processes create data. And then once we define how this works, then technology becomes very, very easy, as does user adoption. Many people try and think about technology and then adapt their processes to fit a technology. This for us is completely wrong, and hence also why flexibility and adaptability of a solution and a platform is so vital, because you want the technology to fit your processes. You know, EDF had a complicated environment, different business units, all with different risks, different priorities. You know, you can't just go and tell a customer, hey, you know, our technology is limited, you need to do it like that. It's more about this is the process, and technology should follow and be enabling of that. But the key theme here is taking this approach is going to drive kind of a data quality first mentality, which is going to make you more efficient, have better control, and ultimately better visibility, which I think were a lot of the big benefits which EDF saw through the implementation. If we want to break it down into typical project phases, some of them EDF did on their own, but one way or another, these are the phases you're going to go through when you're thinking about this. You need to understand what your data looks like. You may need to embark on some degree of cleansing. This can also be, of course, system assisted. Then we need to consolidate data. What this means is data coming from a single or many ERP systems. We need to centralize this. And of course, if you have more business units, more systems, this can be a challenge and quite complicated. And once you've done this, then you operationalize how you do things, how you onboard suppliers, how you manage through the life cycle, how you manage risk and compliance, etc. So these are the typical phases we would go through in terms of an implementation. I know people always think, we just want to manage risk, but it's very important to have a solid foundation if you want to do this in a sustainable way, in an automated way, and at scale without a huge amount of effort. In terms of risk management, for us, it is very typical, and we have here a more generic approach. Suppliers come in, different drivers will indicate what are the risks, and then of course this will drive from a system point of view what are the relevant information and risks which are pertinent to that supplier relationship. And again, when you're doing this at scale, when you have 5 business units, 100 different product categories, different types of relationships, some are you spend a lot of money, some you don't spend a lot of money with. It's very important to do this centrally and at scale, that you have something which is very tailored and personalized to the supplier relationship. If not, what you're going to end up finding is, obviously at times your process will be too bureaucratic when it's the flower shop around the corner, or it's not going to be comprehensive enough when it's, a key strategic supplier which goes maybe into your manufacturing process. So the key element of any kind of risk management approach is to have it tailored to the relationship and identify obviously what are those factors which are driving your risks. And for EDF, it was particularly complex because, again, they have many different business units, many different products, a lot of different risks, and of course, different risks which are applicable not to everybody, but it depends, again, on the delivery environment, and of course, on how much value you're generating with this particular supplier relationship. So having to do this manually would have been, virtually impossible. If you think of the data sets to actually manage these types of risks, they're pretty multidimensional. And here you can see a sample kind of the cube of how it was modeled, going by category, going by business unit, going by risk. And of course, you have different risk scores which apply. And all of these then are being looked up and calculated. And of course, you also have different ownership of who is going to manage different parts of the risk, manage different supplier relationships. So you can imagine that doing this manually and doing it at scale is obviously not something which would have been feasible for most organizations of EDF size and complexity. So this was something which was taken, put into the system, and then fully automated and institutionalized. So people go in, onboard suppliers, update data, things expire. All of these things are set up once, and you define sort of your governance and ownership model, and then the system just ensures that things are being adhered to throughout the life cycle of a supplier relationship. So I will not go into these slides in a lot of detail. That's more for further reading later on, but you can see a lot of the different processes which were in scope from our implementation, from request to ongoing data updates to calculation of risks, and also evaluation by subject matter experts. That's the key thing. Procurement can bring visibility to all the risk factors, but actually you need the true SMEs within different functions to be involved within the process and one process in order to make that effective. Some of the key benefits which were realized by this process was obviously to drive efficiency and remove also duplicated effort, to improve sort of reputation. And here, it's not uncommon that in large organizations, what you have is many functions going out to suppliers, and because nobody knows who else is working with them and what they're doing. Automating a lot of the risk management aspects of it, and then of course providing an opportunity to further, collaborate with your suppliers on different things in the future. And that's also part of the journey. We've opened it up Now, once you have this central control point and this one front door and a central system, it makes it very easy to move on to other processes with suppliers to automate them and to digitize them and ultimately digitalize them and further automate them with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, just to summarize, what are the main benefits that you can drive by moving to a digital supplier management type of model? First, for me, it's better alignment. I think people don't realize this, but due to disparate systems, no ownership of data, what you have is people are not talking the same language. And I think when you bring the organization together and communicate the value of good data and data governance, inherently what you end up having is a far better alignment and enabling people to speak the same language when you're talking around supplier relationships. Second point is around system integration. People tend to think that, we need a single solution because integration is really complicated. Actually, integration is very simple. It's something which has been around many, many years. What makes integration complicated is the fact that data does not align. So by having your data structured in the right way, what you end up seeing is that, hey, we can actually use best of breed solutions, and it's very, very easy for us to connect them and have a central view of all our information. Then we can drive a lot of efficiency. Everybody knows by now that poor data basically leads to inefficient processes and duplication. You can derive better analytics and insights, and it's the ultimate enabler around digital. And that was where we started off here with my presentation. Everyone wants to go digital, and I was recently part of a think tank with large organizations looking at how we enable the digital roadmap. And, the conclusion there, which everyone came to, is we need to go back and take control of our data, because if you're going to rely on a machine to learn and to do things, without us having visibility over what it's doing, it means we really need to trust the data which we're feeding into these digital solutions. Some of the key actions which I want to summarize with, I think also they're probably a bit similar to Greg's as well, but you need to start with governance and clear objectives, what you're trying to achieve, where is the value going to come from. You need to envision that it's kind of a cultural shift, and you need to think about your processes with the idea of data quality coming first, not as an afterthought. Because risk and compliance is heavily reliant on data, right? That's really what it is. It's completely data-driven. The other key point is embed risk and compliance into operational business processes. Again, not in a silo, as Greg sort of communicated. It's something which they manage throughout the life cycle. It's not a standalone process which is done later on in a silo. It's part of, how we onboard, how we update data, how we monitor, how we renew a contract. It has to be embedded into the business process. The same thing around over-engineering. People sometimes will over-engineer, taking a lot of time to start. We've tried to push people that, design is important, it is, but, processes will change and evolve. So it's better to get started with something and, choose a platform which is going to let you incrementally improve, because a lot of the things we realize is, customers will go live, and at the end of the day, before you go live with a new process and system, you don't really know how it's going to work. You're making a lot of assumptions. So once you see it working, the first thing, you're going to do after your implementation is, well, we need to improve it. We can make it better here. And the last point is, don't short sell the value of integration, especially for risk and compliance. If it's not integrated and you have manual touch point, for us, this is a weak control. Integration here is key. Otherwise, you cannot really prove compliance and that there's no circumvention of the process. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Costas, and thanks very much to Greg earlier. Some great information there, and I know we're quite up against time now. But we have had a question in from somebody. If I can maybe take one question, and I know anybody else has got questions afterwards, we can obviously get those back to you offline. But Greg, we had a question from somebody who's asking, does the data analysis of suppliers sit within procurement, finance, or do you have some separate data analysts? I think they're obviously looking at
So within each business, so it sits within supply chain. So supply chain for us is procurement, contract management, and that kind of supplier relationship management activity. So it's really important to us as a kind of a function that we have that capability kind of in-house. So within each of the different business units, we will have some analytic capability, and then the kind of the central overlay of that sits as the kind of the performance and systems kind of component of my overall role. So it's within supply chain and not finance.
Sure. Okay. All right. And we have had a couple of other questions, but I think we're pretty much up against time now. So and of course we've had some questions about the slides too. They will be available afterwards, as will the recording. And of course, should anyone have any further questions, then please let me know, and we can get those answers back to you either by referring to HICX or to Greg, who I'm sure will be happy to answer any further questions that you have. So thanks again to you both, to Greg Brown and to Costas from HICX, and to you all for joining us this morning. I do hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'd like to take the opportunity to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we look forward to welcoming you back in 2019. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.